All right, good afternoon. I see we've got some participants still loading into the room, but wanted to go ahead and get started to keep time for today's presentation. Welcome everyone. This is a program put on by DAYL Association of Young Lawyers on eviction homelessness, the growing crisis here in Dallas. My name is Alex Farr. I'm a member of the Pro Bono Activities Subcommittee of the DAYL Association of Young Lawyers. The event is proudly co-sponsored with the Aid to the Homeless and Politically Aware committees as well. We hope to have a really great conversation for you all today amongst our three speakers who are very kindly giving us some of their time to talk a little bit about the growing eviction crisis facing residents of Dallas. In particular, we've got Mark Melton, who's a partner at Holland & Knight, Thor Erickson, who is a manager at the City of Dallas, and Ashley Brundage with the United Way of Metropolitan Dallas. And they're going to kind of talk about this situation from their respective perspectives on what they're seeing in the community. So we're hoping to touch a little bit about just the overall legal process and protections that are in place for those facing eviction, and then also dive into some of the more social and political issues facing residents of the City of Dallas and the city itself as a result of this. Before we get started, I just want to let everybody know about the course number. Since this does qualify for 1 hour of CLE credit, that number is 174-097-825. You'll need to self-report to the State Bar of Texas to get that credit. And again, it's 174-097-825. If you do have any questions during the program today, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try our best to work answers in as they're available. And I guess without further ado, I'd like to just start off by introducing our three panelists today. So as I mentioned, we've got Mark Melton, a tax attorney, partner at Holland & Knight in their Dallas office. Aside from his usual tax attorney duties, he has become very much an advocate for this eviction process and the issues facing members of our community in the last few months. I guess, Mark, my understanding is you started out just kind of one-off answering people's questions on Facebook, and it's grown to you helping supervise like a large staff of volunteer attorneys who are donating their time to help those facing eviction work their way through the procedures and protections that are in place. And then Ashley Brundage, she's with United Way, and she's been spearheading United Way's housing and homelessness initiative, to address issues facing low-income families. And she's currently leading the citywide collaboration of nonprofit organizations to provide $4.7 million of rental assistance across the community. So she's also very much keyed into these issues and how we're trying to get help to people in the community. And last but not least, Thor Erickson is CARES Act manager at the City of Dallas, and he works there to advance equitable housing policies in the Department of Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization, and he's currently leading the short-term emergency mortgage and rental assistance program for the city. So I think each of them will be able to bring their own unique perspectives to this discussion today. And without further ado, I'd like to just kick it off first with Mark. Just, can you just generally speaking talk a little bit about the eviction process from a legal perspective and how this all starts and what people who are facing this need to know about just to kind of start working down the road of trying to avoid becoming kicked out of wherever they're living?
Well, the process has certainly gotten muddier as we've gotten into a lot of the various moratoriums and special rules and circumstances. But, just the level set with the general rule in a pre-COVID environment. In Texas, evictions are typically a two-step process. And so the first step in order to evict a person is the landlord is required to post a notice to vacate on the inside of the door of the unit. And that notice typically says you have 72 hours to vacate the premises, leave. A lot of people see that and they get very scared and they think that it's a legal document and they voluntarily vacate the premises. And so, sometimes that ends the process. But the reality is that thing is meaningless. Then no one has to follow it. You don't really have to leave after 72 hours. You can just stay there. And all that happens when you don't leave is that starts step 2 of the process, which is after the 72 hours, then the landlord can file the eviction lawsuit itself. And then that process moves forward. There's a hearing, just like any other court hearing. The Justice of the Peace has exclusive jurisdiction to hear those cases. And if the Justice of the Peace rules against the tenant and evicts them, then what happens is no less than 6 days later, then they can execute the writ of possession, which is another notice that says you now have 24 hours to leave. And if you don't leave, the constable is going to show up tomorrow and kick you out. And then the next day, the constable will show up and they will forcibly remove the tenant from the unit. Now, in COVID times, there's been a few adjustments over the last few months. That general process is still in place. So all these other moratorium and process are overlays in this thing. With the one exception of, in the city of Dallas, there is an ordinance that was passed in early April that really looks back to state law, because what the state law actually says is it's really a 3-step process, not a 2-step process. And step 1 under the statute in the property code says that if there is a lease provision or an applicable law that requires a notice of proposed eviction, then you can't move to step 2, which is the 72-hour notice to vacate, until after the response period for that pre-notice expires. So what the city of Dallas did was they created an applicable law for this ordinance that requires landlords to post this notice of proposed eviction that effectively gives them 60 days to respond. It's a 2-step, 21-day that leads to 60, but to shortcut that, is a 60-day delay in the process. And so only after that 60 days can the landlord then post the 72-hour notice to vacate, and then after that file the eviction lawsuit. And so what we've seen in the city of Dallas is a lot of landlords are not following this procedure. And so I think in every single case that we've represented a tenant in Justice of the Peace course, our court, we have gotten those cases dismissed for failing to follow the notice protocols. So that's kind of the city of Dallas issue. Now we have these new overlays from the federal government, the CDC order that came out a couple weeks ago. Basically says that if the tenant provides the landlord with a specific declaration that asserts a few things, like, for example, that they don't make over $100,000 a year, that they have made a good faith effort to obtain rent assistance from one of the programs we're going to talk about later, and a few other things, then the landlord is not allowed to evict them until January 1st of 2021. And so, but to turn that on, the tenant has to act affirmatively, fill out that declaration and provide it to the landlord. If they don't, it just doesn't apply at all. So we created a form declaration that we've circulated all across the state, actually, at this point, for people to fill out and give to their landlords if they're behind on rent. And it at least provides enough delay so that hopefully they can go talk to Ashley and Thor and their groups and get rent assistance to get them caught up, so that the eviction is no longer an issue. So I'll stop there, and we can ask follow-ups or move on. But
yeah, certainly. So Ashley, if I could just jump to you then. So someone files this notice, this form notice, and then what is their next step? What are they supposed to be trying to do when they reach out to an organization like United Way or some other related organization when they're looking for what kind of assistance is available to them when they're facing these issues?
Yeah, so for us, we're working with 15 different organizations across the city of Dallas to provide rental assistance. So, filing the CDC document and getting the moratorium on evictions is important and helps them stay in their homes, but the rent is still piling up. And so it's important for families to continue to request that rental assistance and pay that rent. It's also important for the property management companies. Not all of our property managers are big companies out there. We've got a lot of small landlords who also have bills to pay, and rent's important for them. So there's quite a bit of documentation that's required of the families to submit, and many of our organizations allow for all of that to happen online. So they need to gather up their lease documents, they need to gather up income documents, and get that all submitted however is best for them. And a case manager is always there to walk the families through that to help. So on our website, just for reference, it's unitedwaydallas.org/rental-assistance. We have all the organizations that are listed there. And anybody can choose any organization. It doesn't matter. And Thor also dropped in a website too that shares more about the program. But they can come to any organization and get assistance. So most of the organizations listed there still have funds available, and where funds have been expended, we've noted that as well.
So, Thor, from the city's perspective, you know, what is the city doing to coordinate with these nonprofit entities and other groups that are trying to help this population that's quite at risk? Can you tell us a little bit about that from the city's perspective?
Absolutely, thank you for that. And the first link I dropped in was the link to our webpage. It has all the participating organizations listed, including just the link to United Ways so you can get to their collaborative. But from the city standpoint, in April when we were launching our first program, we launched to do direct rental assistance provided through two departments, the Department of Housing and the Office of Community Care. Knowing that was our quickest way to launch an emergency rent relief program while we were working on our request for applications for nonprofits to apply to offer rental assistance. So over a series of a few months, we launched our direct program that people were able to apply in May, and then got nonprofits some funding to administer directly as well. Knowing that not everybody turns to the city for support or knows how to work with the city, most of the folks that were applying had never applied for government assistance. Some had. No one has applied for emergency rent relief at this level. So all of this was, you know, we're building it as we go, learning from other cities, and putting together a strategy that would allow us to reach some of our most vulnerable residents and residents across the city of Dallas, making sure that, you know, the nonprofit and cities were working together to blanket our outreach. It's still an ongoing effort. There are still funds remaining. The Dallas Housing Authority is doing a general application, lottery-based system per district. And the United Way Collaborative has this collaboration of nonprofits. So again, different approaches to reach residents who need assistance. And lastly, there's multiple pots of funds from HUD, from the Treasury. There's more money potentially on its way at different levels, and each of those different government agencies have different regulations on what we can and can't do with the money for rental assistance. So that's why you see some variation in programs of what's being offered across the board.
Yeah.
Thanks. And, oh, go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry, real quick, is I think one of the great things about getting the money out to nonprofits to help provide the rental assistance is we're able to serve some folks that the city can't. So if you are not a documented citizen, you can come to one of the nonprofits and get this rental assistance where the city is unable to do that.
Got it.
And then just to add to, because of the different requirements based on the different grants that are out there, we do have a pot of money that not only provides rental assistance, but provides the utility assistance, electricity, things like that, that goes along with it to help keep people housed. So if not paying one of those bills is leading to somebody getting evicted from their apartment, we do have funds at some of our organizations that are able to provide that assistance as well. And that's on our website.
Thank you. So Mark, kind of puts me back to the legal process. How are people, like, what are some of the biggest hurdles that people are facing in the legal proceedings, apart from you know, going out and finding a lawyer that can help them? Where are people supposed to be finding information to help them with this, especially with the kind of overlay of the new protections in place in our current times?
Well, this is one of the problems because it's near impossible for a lay person to figure this out.
Yeah.
It was hard enough before when it was just the regular rules, but you know, now that you've got all these, you know, state and federal and city, they're not really competing moratoriums or rules, but they all kind of dovetail in together. Nobody can figure these out. One of the biggest problems we're seeing is that for people that go in and represent themselves pro se, almost all of them are getting evicted. And part of the problem is the justices of the peace are acting in some cases very badly. They are not upholding the law on their own motion. But if a lawyer goes in and says, well, here's a defense, then they're dismissed almost out of hand. And so the Supreme Court has recently issued some new emergency orders that require justices of the peace to require landlords to make certain certifications that should lead a justice of the peace to conclude that these cases will be dismissed. They are not. The worst offender out there is Judge Sircone. If anybody wants to run against him, I will personally finance and operate your campaign to unseat him. I cannot say how disappointed I am in, I could say it in more certain terms, but anyway, we're going to go for him for sure in 2022.
So, and then in terms of, you know, that process, for the people who are able to get representation, or at least to have the wherewithal to be able to get their first case either dismissed or, you know, held out, what's their timeline looking like? I mean, because this whole crisis could theoretically keep going well into the winter months. What are people thinking about? Like, well, what if I still can't get work, or the restaurant industry is still cratered in the next 6 months and I won't be able to get more rent? You know, is there any limitation on people being able to go back through the process again, or try to get other protections in place? Because especially as we get into colder months, I can imagine that this is really starting to look like more of a crisis.
Well, I think on the legal side, on that question, if the case is dismissed, then that means the landlord has to start all over, right? So if you're in the city of Dallas, that means now they've got to go post the notice of proposed eviction again, wait 60 days, you know, then file or post their notice to vacate, file the eviction suit. So realistically, if something gets dismissed, you got probably another 90 to 100 days before there's a second bite at the apple. You know, it's probably a better question for Thor or Ashley on whether you can revisit the well for rent assistance. You know, I think there's a 3-month, $1,500 a month limitation on most of these programs. I know for me, I've actually raised some private money that is not subject to any of these restrictions, so that I can dole out some rent assistance money on my own with no rules, in my sole discretion, which I will continue to do because I don't like rules. And so, but I think to your point, you know, 6 months from now, this is still going to be happening. Even if COVID disappears tomorrow, the economic effects are there. So that's not going to automatically reverse itself. And I think, you know, even if you wait 90 days and then they get evicted, it's not as if a lot of these people are going to have work before then to be able to recover. So the only real answer to this is that Congress has to stop fighting with each other on partisan lines, come together and pass several $100 billion worth of rent assistance packages, because this is going to require a trickle-up economic theory to solve this, where you've got to inject the dollars down at the bottom of the structure. So if you give the rent assistance to the tenants, that bails them out. Now they're caught up. They send that money to the landlord, that bails them out. Now they're caught up. They send that money up to the banks. Now they're bailed out. Literally everyone gets bailed out when you put the money at the bottom of the structure instead of the top. And right now, it's not. I'm not optimistic about the chances of Congress actually coming together and doing the right thing, because we have a complete lack of leadership at a lot of different levels.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I was going to say, Ashley, go ahead, please.
Yeah, as far as like limitations on the programming, like Mark alluded to, so that we have 3 different grants. So one of them can provide up to 3 months of rental assistance. One of them can provide 2 months of rental assistance, but that might be changing. Keep your fingers crossed. And one of them can provide 2 months of assistance and an additional month if it's paying in arrears. So, and that third one also provides the utility assistance along with it. So, and then each of them have a maximum amount that they can provide, which is then the $1,500 a month. And it maxes out at either $3,000 or $45,000, depending on the grant that we have. But you know, I mean, I will agree with what Mark said. It's not enough, right? We needed passage of the HEROES Act that was sitting in Senate. That's now getting modified by Congress to lower the amount of money that they're requesting to try and make it your bill to pass through the Senate. But you know, we were looking at data recently that suggests that there's over 183,000 just in Dallas County that are going to need help paying their rental bill for the next month. And that's just 1 month, right? We've been in this for 6 months now. So folks aren't magically going to come up with the money that they need to pay rental assistance. So we need advocacy for those limits to be lifted. We need to be able to get real targeted with some of this assistance too, which United Way was just the grateful recipient of $1 million donation to help do some more targeted rental assistance so that we can go into some of the hot spots for evictions and really help those families that are more likely to fall into homelessness than some others. And so we're working on developing that program now, but it'll be free from a lot of these restrictions that we have in place from the federal government, because once a person receives any kind of CARES Act assistance through these programs, they can't come back. They can only get the 2 or 3 months, and then that's it.
Got it. So just to change course a little bit, you mentioned, you know, trying to target families that are most likely facing homelessness. Can you speak a little bit about, you know, the end result of this if someone is not successful in getting assistance or navigating through the legal process and they get evicted? You know, the societal strain, the probably public health crisis strain of people facing homelessness right now. What has United Way been seeing, or the other organizations you've been partnering with, in terms of like the growing homelessness crisis that could be, you know, probably already growing and could get worse as this drags on?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely already growing. People are getting evicted during these times. And so we are seeing more and more people who are showing up at the shelters or showing up at places like Our Calling, trying to get food assistance, things like that, that have never needed these services before. When these families lose their homes, they more often than not are already out of a job, or it's going to cause them to lose their job. It causes disruptions in their children's school and education. It causes health concerns. I mean, not only with the COVID disease being out there and the contagiousness of it, but with every other health aspect that a family is already facing. You know, when you're out on the streets, you're not thinking about going and getting your regular medicines or going and getting your regular checkups. So homelessness just makes everything worse, right? When you don't know where you're going to sleep at night, that's all that you think about. So yeah, we are seeing a growing population. We have less shelter room because all of our emergency shelters are having to socially distance their beds. There are less beds available for folks to sleep in. I know the city has done some work with the convention center to house folks there. That's now closed. We're working on, there were some people who were placed in hotels. Those are being moved out of the hotel rooms now, and hopefully into some sort of semi-permanent housing for them. But it's really hard to put somebody in a hotel room and then say, okay, now you have to go to an emergency shelter. That's a large step down in their living arrangements that most people don't want to take. So there's a lot of complications that are happening related to this if we can't keep people housed. And on top of that, the economic strain that happens on social service providers and the city to rehouse somebody. It's more expensive to rehouse somebody than it would be just to keep them housed and provide that rental assistance they need now and create that stability that they're looking for right now.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions was, you know, we're talking about the bill that, you know, we would need to pay to try to keep everybody in for a longer period of time. And, you know, how does that compare, obviously? And it sounds like it would be much worse to try to, get people who've been kicked out, relocated, put in somewhere else that provides them shelter.
Right.
Mark, just returning quickly. So we had a question from a listener about and I think Ashley mentioned the ability for undocumented or non, citizen residents to get some type of financial assistance through some of the pro bono or nonprofit organizations. But in terms of the actual legal procedures in place, would someone who's not a U.S. citizen or possibly even undocumented be able to take advantage of the moratorium protections, or is that something that's kind of a blurry line right now?
No, I think it's clear that they can. And that's a hugely vulnerable population for a couple of reasons. First, they're scared to reach out in the first place, but second, most of the legal aid, or at least the usual legal aid organizations, have a restriction against representing undocumented persons. And so unless there's some kind of special circumstance, but typically eviction is not going to fall within those. So they not only are vulnerable for the usual reasons, they also have no access to counsel. And so one of the things that we've tried to make clear from the beginning on our project with Dallas Evictions 2020, again, not liking rules, there are no restrictions. We can represent whoever the hell we want, and we do. And so if they're undocumented, bring them on. We'll bring translators or Spanish-speaking attorneys. Yeah. We don't have those kinds of restrictions. But the laws apply equally to everyone, so they're entitled to stay housed just like everyone else.
Thank you. Another question. So we talked about rental assistance, trying to keep people current, and this can be answered by anyone on the panel. But what about every landlord usually has some type of penalties, interest, fees, issues that come up when your rent is late. How do people cover those? I mean, is that just coming out of those same funds? Is that suspended somehow? There's a lot of penalties that people would face that just kind of make the issue even worse, right?
Yeah, and that it varies by program. So some programs allow for fees to be covered. The majority of our funds do not, though. It was to go to just rental assistance. So what many of our caseworkers do when they reach out to the landlords is to help negotiate that on behalf of the tenant, is to ask for fees to be waived. The majority of our landlords have been able to do that and are willing to do it, even though it is a lease term. And that's been promising to see that landlords are willing to work with folks, especially knowing that they're going to get a rent check from the city or a nonprofit within a reasonable time frame. That is just a different situation. There have been some landlords, though, that say they are unable to waive it, and so that tenant has been hit with their late fees according to the lease terms, and it does not appear they're violating any laws by doing so. They're just not working with them as much as they could be.
Yeah, we've got some really good caseworkers who will twist some arms of landlords to say, we got a couple months of rent here. If you can waive all these other fees or even past rent, if we can only provide 2 months and they need more than that. And they'll do some really hard negotiating with these landlords and just say, we can help, but we need these things. And we do. Or is right. We have a lot of landlords who are working with our organizations to keep families housed. I don't think that eviction is what they want to do. It's just their only recourse right now that they see. So if they have another option, they're taking that.
Has anybody seen landlords using other reasons to try to get people out? So maybe non-payment of rent is the one that we know would, if the person is properly represented and is aware of all the protections, would be able to delay. Are landlords looking for other reasons to say, well, you've breached your lease, you need to get out, or do they still have to go through the same whole process? I guess that's maybe for Mark first.
Yeah, so it's an important question because most of these moratoriums, like the city ordinance and even the CDC order, they only apply to evictions that are based on the non-payment of rent. So if you're committing a crime or you have some other kind of lease violation, or if your lease term is just expired and is not being renewed, like that's an eviction for a reason other than the non-payment of rent. And so none of these exceptions apply and you can be evicted. We certainly are seeing pretextual arguments for reasons other than the non-payment of rent. Occasionally, to be honest, you see one that you kind of look at the evidence and go, yeah, I get it. That's probably legit. But in most cases, it's completely pretextual. And, you know, we've found, at least in my experience, that when I call landlords and they make those arguments and I say, that sounds very pretextual to me, do you really want to go fight with me in front of a judge about this? 9 times out of 10, they back off. But when their tenants call them, it's nasty. Like they just, I could sit here all day and tell you stories about the things that we've seen. We've probably talked to more than 3,000 people at this point
Wow.
for our little pro bono project here. And we've seen all kinds of crazy stories, and some of them have ended well, and some of them have ended very poorly.
From a national perspective, and this is for anybody on the panel to take up, are you seeing programs or policies or unique approaches taken by any other major cities across the U.S. that you're looking to or would hope to implement here in Dallas if possible? Anything you're taking inspiration from? Yeah,
so the Boulder, Colorado implemented a program that I'm going to be having some conversations with the city council about soon. They don't know it yet, but it's going to happen. And in most major cities, you're required as a landlord to register your rental units with the city. And so what they did in Boulder was they took part of those registration fees that landlords pay to register the rental units, and they allocated a certain percentage of those fees to basically fund a legal aid organization that does nothing but represent tenants in evictions. And so, under that program, any tenant that's being evicted has a right to counsel. They're given the information on how to reach that counsel, because that's another problem we have. People are getting these eviction notices. They have no idea that legal aid even exists. And so they're just getting railroaded. But I thought that program was interesting because it provides a funding source that is directly related to providing legal counsel to tenants, which, as we all know, most of us are lawyers here. Having someone that knows their rights and is not being taken advantage of is not an unfair advantage on the part of the tenant. It's just following the law. And so I think that's a program that we certainly want to take a look at. We also want to fill some holes in our current, pro bono legal aid services around town. Most of them, because of the way that they're funded, they're limited in who they can represent. And so we already talked about the fact that you can't be undocumented in most of those cases. You also have to fall, in some cases below 200% of the federal poverty line. In some cases, it's 300%. But for a family of 4, that's like $40,000 or something in that range. And so, I remember back in the day when I was younger, when, I might have made $45,000, right? You're outside of the ability to get free legal assistance from the traditional legal aid organizations, but you still don't have $2 left at the end of the month to go spend on hiring a lawyer at hundreds of dollars an hour to go represent you in an eviction suit. So that's a whole, I think we as a legal community need to come together and solve, because there currently is no solution, and there has to be one.
I would add to that in Houston, there's a group called January Advisors who has been working across the state with various counties to make eviction filing and hearing data available publicly live, like on a daily basis live. And in Dallas County, we have a 20-year-old system or something crazy that cannot allow for this to happen. Like it just does not work where it needs to be. It's slated to be upgraded within the next 3 years. So advocating to get that to happen sooner rather than later would be a huge win for our community, so that we can identify eviction hotspots quicker than and with more updated data, obviously on a live basis. I think too, I mentioned earlier about needing to get more targeted with rental assistance. Right now it's just been blanket help the community, which is important, but there are different factors that can determine whether somebody is going to fall into homelessness versus somebody who could get evicted and will just find another home. And so being able to get targeted with these dollars and use them more strategically, I think is really important, and we're seeing done in several communities across the nation as well. And then, the importance of legal representation in eviction cases cannot be understated. So Mark, hearing about that program is great. But like instituting some sort of eviction diversion program would be so beneficial to anybody who is facing this, because knowing your rights makes the most difference in any of this. Having the financial assistance helps, but knowing your rights is much more beneficial to these families.
So is there any like push within the city to come up with some kind of know your rights type program or something of that nature that will get that information out there? Because while you said people may not always necessarily turn to the city, it does seem like a place that I would expect a number of people first look when they're looking for what are my rights. You kind of end up on a government page. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so some of that started. I mean, our Office of Fair Housing has been working to get that out. You know, the lack of just general knowledge around a lot of how government works and what's available, and you know, what are your rights, is just something that there's a large gap in. I mean, you see all your gaps when you have a disaster hit, you know, whether it's a hurricane or fires, or in this case, a pandemic. You start to see all of the ways people are not prepared to know what to do, where to turn, and how to react. So in some ways, you know, this is just disaster recovery on another level. So the push for education always comes out of disaster conversations. And how do you get people more prepared for the next time this happens? Unfortunately, it always happens. We're always in that mindset of like, we're always recovering from something and trying to learn, and then it sort of dies off because something else gets in our way. So the continued need for education and people to know their rights and all of this is just continual, but it's exponentially greater when you're in the mode of recovery and trying to find assistance for folks. But going back to the previous question, some of the other things that we're trying to work through is how do we create a process working with landlords as well directly. So if landlords have received a lot of the CDC declarations or COVID impact statements from their tenants, making sure that they also have the resources to direct the tenant on how to apply, because a lot of these programs are determined based on impact of COVID and income of that individual to qualify for assistance. And so if landlords know what situation their tenants are in, they could potentially like help with the application process, potentially apply themselves, and then work with individuals within their complexes. So there's a lot of things that we're like learning from other cities in terms of how the money gets to folks. Some municipalities have given money directly to the resident to pay their bills, sometimes in the form of just a gift card in order to, like a Visa card, and sometimes they've written the check but given it to the actual person to deliver to their landlord. So there's a lot of elements of it that we can learn from other municipalities and how we can make future iterations of this stronger. So it's a learning process and being able to be nimble enough and quick enough to make those adjustments on the fly.
Yeah, that's a great point about getting the landlord on the side of helping people apply for assistance, because it makes a lot more sense for all parties involved, I think. So that's a great point to make. Ashley, just returning to one thing you'd mentioned, eviction diversion program. So is that what is that exactly, and how does that differ from what we've been talking about, if at all?
It's really something where you require mediation and evictions with facilitated access to the financial assistance that the family needs. So making sure that they have that accessibility to a lawyer so that they can understand their rights and have a lawyer that can mediate on their behalf and get them the financial assistance to the landlord so that they can help stop those eviction proceedings. I would say too, I think adding another layer onto that, just related to COVID specifically, is having some sort of expungement process of evictions that can be proven to be related to COVID. I think would be really important moving forward out of this, because evictions go onto people's records and keep people out of housing moving forward, right? The landlords check for that on their credit history, and they won't rent again to somebody who has been evicted. So an expungement of those would be huge. I was going to say too, when you were talking about educating on rights, the Texas Tenants Union does a lot of that and has a lot of good information. And then City Square, I know, has been putting some programming dollars behind trying to educate the community about their rights for housing and rentals. So, and Thor mentioned the Office of Fair Housing, has a RFA open right now that there's some folks that have applied to be able to do legal assistance and that community education that's needed. So hopefully we'll see some more of that soon.
Mark, with the volume of cases that are, I'm sure, popping up at this point, I mean, I assume that the court system is somewhat overloaded. Are the timelines really being stuck to at this point, or just as a matter of, you know, just the intense number of these being filed now, is it actually dragging out longer? And if so, are there other alternatives available to people and landlords if they want to try to work something out on their own? Are there mediation alternatives, or are there other things that people can pursue rather than trying to go through this formal procedure, at least at the outset?
I mean, there is not a formal informal procedure, right? You either go through the eviction or you don't. They can always call their tenant and try and work out a deal. I mean, that's obviously always okay. As far as the volume of cases, you know, I don't think that we have seen yet the tidal wave of eviction cases that are certainly coming. And I think that the reason for that is we've had this series of moratoriums that have just kind of put the brakes on everything and created a stall. But it hasn't resolved the overall problem, right? People are still behind on the rent. They're still, at some point, the cliff is right in front of us and we're going to fall off of it. And it's a judge by judge issue. There are some justices of the peace that have followed the rules and have you know, tried to extend hearing dates, you know, pushing them out as far as they possibly can to create more delay. Recently, we all saw that, you know, Clay Jenkins had published a tweet or something that said most of the JPs had agreed not to hear cases for, you know, another couple of weeks or something like that. The reality was their dockets were already full for the next 3 weeks, and so all it said was we're not going to hear new cases. They didn't delay the existing ones, and so that seemed much ado about nothing. But you know, then you still have Judge Turcone over there that just is evicting everyone he possibly can, whether they're legally should be evicted or not.
So what I mean, at the end of the day, what is the economic incentive for some of these landlords? Are there really like tons of people that would be available and able to fill apartments or houses that have been, you know, vacated because of eviction? I mean, is there just a bunch of renters out there waiting to fill those spots? I mean, what's the landlord looking at in terms of an income perspective?
It depends on who you talk to. I think the smart people recognize the reality of this, that there's not a big line of tenants out there waiting to come in and fill these empty spots. You know, maybe on some micro scale, like some landlords are going to get some calls, but if you look at it on a macro level, you've got X number of units and Y number of people, right? And if you start displacing people, there's not another person in the pool to go fill the house. And if it was a person that just vacated a different unit. So in the whole system, it's still there. The worst possible scenario that we could see from a policy perspective is tens of thousands of people in Dallas that are sitting outside of empty units, right?
Yeah.
Because for 20,000 homeless people, there's 20,000 empty units, right? So we have the housing stock, it's sitting right there. We've got to figure out a way to get this rent assistance boosted so that we can get those people back under a roof and keep them housed.
Perhaps, you know, I don't want to go too off topic, but I mean, one thing I can think of that's related is, say, there's small business owners. Have people called you or reached out to any of you, you know, any of the panelists, you know, from your experience? You know, I just can't make my rent for my shop. And if I can't keep my shop, I can't keep my income. And it's just kind of a waterfall effect of having other issues. You know, what's out there just very briefly for them, if anything?
There's no assistance for small businesses outside of what the Small Business Administration did with the PPP loans.
Yeah.
It's obviously now over. That was it. That was the totality of the relief.
So yeah, so that kind of just makes the problem even bigger, I think, in many cases, my guess.
It does.
I think especially when you consider how many of your lower income folks are entrepreneurs and small business owners in their own rights. And so how it's going to disproportionately affect that group of people who are already disproportionately people of color in our community. It's creating a lot of different complexities there for them.
And it is hard, and you know, and Ashley was very helpful in resolving an issue that we had with one poor guy that he just got out of jail in 2019, and he started his own business selling frozen meat door to door, right? And so this poor guy is so some of the people that we're dealing with in a lot of cases are not 140 IQs, right? And so the struggle that we had was trying to get him rent assistance was he had no financial records, right? He just had a bank account, and he would put money in it when he earned it, and then he would spend it when he had to go buy inventory or other business expenses, but there was no income statement or balance sheet. And it was really difficult to figure out, all right, what is your actual income here? And so we actually had to go back through his bank statements and recreate accounting records for his business so that the nonprofits could meet the requirements of their grants to be able to show that he did have a decrease in income because of COVID. And so the complexities around the small business owners are even more interesting. But you're absolutely right. We've seen this happen where people have lost their businesses and they've shut their doors, and then they lost their home the following month. I mean, this is happening right now in real time.
Wow. So are you, so obviously Dallas is doing certain things, and including the rental assistance programs that it has. Are you coordinating or aware of, obviously things that are happening just next door in Tarrant County or Collin County? What's going on there, and how is Dallas coordinating with those, local partnering counties?
Yeah, so there's not much partnering that can be done. The way the money has come to the cities and counties is that we've each received our distribution based on the HUD or Treasury formulas of how much money the municipality or the jurisdictions receive. So people that live in the city of Dallas are not eligible for county rental assistance funds. People who live in the counties but do not live in the city of Dallas can receive rental assistance. So what we do, we put out messaging when we've communicated with people in our program, and when people have applied and they don't live in the city of Dallas, we've referred them to a proper county if they've had a program open. But it's been at different times, right? And likewise, when the county folks have had people who live in the city, but one of the multiple counties that you can live in and live in the city of Dallas, they've sent them over to us, and we've referred them over to United Way or DHA. So when I say there's no coordination, I mean, it's been at a small scale, right? But a lot of the program requirements when people apply, it's been clear, like you have to live in this city or live within this county, not in this city. But again, it comes back to education. Many people don't know where they live in terms of if they live in a city or the county and what the difference is. We have had multiple conversations with people saying that they live in the city of Dallas when they don't. They live in Dallas County. And so we work with people to help them understand the difference. But there's a big knowledge gap there as well in terms of what you have. It goes back to one of my points, and like a lot of people turning for assistance, this is some of their first times applying for assistance, and to understand those distinctions and jurisdictions is a challenging first step for many folks as well.
Thank you. Being cognizant of time, I just want to make sure that we ask the question of everyone on the panel. How can lawyers or legal professionals help, aside from obviously donating to organizations? Obviously we have a very valuable skill set we can use. How do people get involved? What should they be doing? Where's the areas most of need right now?
I'll start on this one. Since I'm talking to a group of young lawyers, it looks like there are 56 of you watching this thing, which is fantastic. We've got this kind of makeshift loose association pro bono project called Dallas Evictions 2020. And I saw some people on the list have already volunteered for it, and thank you for that. But for the rest of you, you can volunteer through this program. And basically, here's how it works. We've got a website. It's DallasEvictions2020.com. We ask people if they're facing evictions to either send us an email, or we have a Google Voice line set up where they can either leave a voicemail or send a text message. And when those messages come in, my poor wife has been conscripted to run intake on this project. So she spends all of her days every single day going through the emails and voicemails and just trying to make sure that it's really about an eviction and not something else. But anyway, once she gets to the intake process, she just sends that case to the next lawyer in the queue. And then the volunteer lawyer reaches out to the client, talks to them, figures out what the issue is. Some of these things are just phone calls where you're just explaining what the rules are to people and giving them a little comfort that they're not going to be homeless in 3 days. And some of them are a lot more involved. You know, in fact, I got a call just right before this started where a landlord had turned off the utilities to a lady's apartment because she hadn't voluntarily vacated, even though just last week we went to court and the judge dismissed the eviction. So it looks like I'll be going back to court this afternoon to throw a hammer down. But we need lawyers that can do these sorts of things and that are willing to actually take the Zoom calls and go to court and represent these people. This isn't rocket science as an area of the law. It's fairly simple. But we certainly provide all the support that you could need in terms of form documents, and you can always call me and I'll give you advice on what the law is and how to proceed. But we still need more volunteers, especially as this thing begins to ramp up towards the end of the year. We're going to need a lot more. And it's like I tell young lawyers all the time, you have this special set of skills to be able to right a lot of wrongs in the world. And when you get to wake up every morning and you get to decide whether you're going to solve somebody else's problem that is insurmountable to them, this is a life-changing event for this person, and for you it's a couple hours of your time. That's a power that is almost godlike in certain circumstances, and I personally believe that we all have a responsibility to use that power as often as we possibly can to help those less fortunate around us. So if you haven't already volunteered, I would strongly encourage you to do that. I will put on another training program so that you guys can get trained up and, again, offer all the assistance that you need to be able to do this work. But this is an opportunity where we're in a pandemic and a crisis, and that's where true leaders are forged. So I would encourage you to take this opportunity to lead and go out there and help some people that really, really need it.
Thank you. Ashley, anything from your end?
I mean, I would go volunteer with Mark. I think too, advocating for fair housing policies, advocating for anti-discrimination policies, especially based on criminal history or source of funding, just kind of systemic things in the long run would be helpful. I think that from that legal perspective that you all have, it's different than, and more than some of the rest of us. And so being able to help apply that expertise when it comes to advocating at the state, local, and federal level around housing policies is critical. And then advocating for affordable housing in our regions too.
Mark, just circle back 1 second. Is your program open to paralegals as well? Are they able to help in some way or another?
I mean, we can always use help because a lot of the attorneys are busy, myself included, and it's always great to have paralegal help where they can just draft pleadings and things where you could just review and sign. So yes, there's certainly a place for a paralegal to assist. We've even had law students assist. So over the summer, SMU Law School gave us a bunch of their students to help with the clinic. So that was very helpful. And I saw there was a question on how to get in touch with me for volunteering. You can just email me at my law firm email account, which is mark.melton@hklaw.com, and I'll get you on the list and set up.
I'm sure you don't have many emails, Mark.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know, man.
Replying still.
Well, Thor, I know I want to be cognizant of your time too. Do you have any final remarks you'd like to make to the group, just from the city's perspective, or ways that you've seen people can get involved to help out, or anybody we should be lobbying, that kind of stuff? I know you can't make official comments on that, but off the record.
Off the record on a recorded session.
Yeah.
The main thing I would say is, we constantly are working on housing policies. Rental programs are part of that affordable housing policy. We have our comprehensive housing policy. You can go to DallasHousingPolicy.com to read it. We have our housing policy task force. You can shoot me an email. I can get you added to that to be on that list to understand what we're doing. We regularly hold events for the general public to attend, ask us questions, help us work through policy things, as we're working on creating the policies or amending them before we present to City Council. So your perspective in life and your technical skills go a long way to help that conversation, both from just a knowledge building component to providing, a different angle on something that we're working through. So I encourage you to sign up, get active on that. If affordable housing policy is, of an interest to you, reach out to me, and happy to get you guys involved in that way as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Unless there are any other questions, I think I would just like to say thank you to everybody for today's very informative and I think eye-opening perspectives on this crisis. So I think as everybody can see that people, especially in the young lawyers community who are looking to get involved, there are definitely ways and avenues. You can certainly help with Mark. If you're more interested in things like advocacy and things like that, there's certainly organizations like the United Way that you can get ideas from and partner with. So thank you very much for all of our panelists today. Just want to, again, mention that this does qualify for 1 hour of COE. So for those of you who missed at the beginning, the number for today's course is 174-09-7825. That is 174-09-7825. And with that, I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you again, Mark, Ashley, and Thor, for your time today. And thank you for all that you're doing for the residents of Dallas. And we hope to be helping partner with you guys going forward and helping to overcome this very, very pressing issue for our city. So thanks.
All right, thanks for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.